Hello there, Di here, just back with part 2 of making a serial journal. This is finishing off the covers, this section, and it's a rather long video. It's 14 minutes, but goes through all the different processes. Here you can see the journal cover that we started in the last video, and I've put an extra layer on the front. I haven't worried about putting a second layer on the inside because that's going to be covered shortly, but I put an extra layer of brown paper on the front just to make it more robust. Getting rid of the phone book that I was using to do the signatures. Putting down a bit of protection with the glare as before. And picking out the inks. I mainly used, I think the first one I used was Crushed Olive. These are Distress inks. Forest Moss and Mowed Lawn. I didn't use the Vintage Photo, or if I did, it was just a little bit on the inside. I did go in later before I did the sealing coat on the outside with a little bit of Salty Ocean just to put a bit more blue into it, increase the tealiness. As you can see, I just rub it on direct from the ink pad. It gives good definition, catches those little wrinkly high points, has areas of light and dark, it works pretty well. This is the Mowed Lawn, which is a brighter green. The Crushed Olive is quite yellowy by comparison, but Mowed Lawn gives it a real green look. And the final one is Forest Moss, which is quite a dark colour. I think when I did the brown one, I wanted to see what the green was like, but I think I prefer the browns in all honesty, or maybe I'll try a blue one. I haven't tried a blue one yet. Love blue. This one's quite appropriate for my son, who's one of his nicknames is Tree Hugger. He used to do a lot of work here in Tasmania for the environmental lobby groups, and so green suits him. This is just spraying the whole caboodle with water. Helps to move the ink around, even out those patches of brown where this little ink has gone because they're deeper. It doesn't turn it to mud as you'd think. It doesn't mix the colours terribly well. It just moves it around a little bit. You still get quite good areas of the different colours. I did do a little rubbing just to spread the water. It dries very quickly, it's soaked into the paper very quickly. Just helps move it around. Now we've moved to the inside. We're just applying a bit of ink there. It was really just around the edges that I needed to worry about, because with the best will in the world, I always have a gap between. If I line the inside, there's always a gap. So inking up, oh there we are, we did use some Vintage Photo. It's rather a dry old ink pad, I need to ink it up. It doesn't seem this is Crushed Olive going on. It's a nice, fairly newish ink pad, it's fairly juicy still. It always surprises me how long these ink pads last. I've had most of these for, well, ever since I've been stamping, so many years, well, several years anyway. They're still going strong. I have got 2 or 3 wrinkles, I must get more. They seem to be good quality, they last forever. Now that's about it. That's the cover done. It's all inked. Now it just has to be left to dry thoroughly. Again, I think I left this one overnight, though it doesn't quite take that long. it does need to be left for quite a while to dry absolutely thoroughly before you coat it. The little brown journal I used matte Mod Podge for the cover, and even though it was matte, it did give it a nice luster. This journal I did, after it was dry, I coated it with a new Liquitex matte super heavy gel that I've got. And it wasn't as effective. Here we go. I'm just going to make the lining now. I just have to, the only piece of paper that I had that was large enough was a piece of watercolour paper. So I fiddle and faddle around with that to measure it out and trim it up. I did give it some creases down the crease line because it you don't want it terribly creased, but it's important, I think, just to have that marker there. It helps you centre it on the page. Give you some guidelines for when you're setting it in, and helping once you actually attach the lining page to the journal cover. It helps it with that initial folding. Always takes me a while to work it out. It doesn't pay to get too intense about it, because when you fold it up, it looks as if it's going to poke out from the sides, but actually when it's dried and glued down, it doesn't. Here I am going in with my little collection of spray dyes. These are, I think, Wilton gels for cake decorating. My daughter does a lot of wonderful biscuits and decorations, particularly around Christmas time. She's very clever at doing those, and she's got a good collection of the Wilton colours, and so she brought them out one day and we mixed up a whole collection of her colours. So here I'm using Kelly green, and there's a teal I use, several different colours. Dried off between, I sprayed it quite heavily the first layer and then dried it with the heat gun, which I normally don't do. I normally like to let things air dry, but I like the dense pigment lines that drying it with the heat gun does on water paper. So I got in and used it on this, though I still left it overnight after I'd finished before I adhered it into the covers. Here I'm going around the edges, just trying to darken them up a little bit. It really does help to dry it between the layers. It helps to give that depth to the colours. Okay, that's about it. That's as far as I'm going to go. A bit more blue around the edges. It looks very effective. In reality, it's rich and luscious. Now here's, my camera stopped. I think I'd filled there's Liquitex. I think I'd filled the card up or something. So I mixed up this Liquitex with a little bit of water because it's very thick. And I'm just finishing off the cover here. But I wasn't that impressed. I didn't like it as much as the matte Mod Podge. It doesn't have the same amount of luster. I did go in afterwards and give this another coat with the Mod Podge over the top. I think it doesn't hurt to give it a couple of coats, especially as this book will be probably bouncing around in the back of the four-wheel drive as they tootle around the state, so it probably needs to be a bit robust. Just finishing off the edges there. Okay, a bit later, it's dried, and now I'm completing the the fastenings. I've put some grommets, one in the centre of the spine, one in the centre of the back to put some seam binding through as a fastener, and I've found a couple of reasonably appropriate buttons out of my little hoard of special buttons that I have. One's a wooden flower, the other one looks to me like polished, carved coconut shell. Whether it is or not, I might be just imagining that, but that's what it looks like. It looks organic anyway. So I'm poking some holes in. I've got some brown, it's crochet thread actually, a Simcoe, I think. I use a various range of, it's a good weight for stitching. I'm just going to stitch on those buttons to create somewhere to wrap the seam binding around to fasten the journal. I was going with a big darning needle. It's a bit sharp. I must find a nice long one with a blunt point, a sort of a long tapestry needle, sort of much safer. I tend to perforate myself quite frequently with the darning needle. Still, it gets the job done, and it was the one that was there, so. I've got some nice brown seam binding sitting there. That's from, I think it was from the little Blackbird journal. I'd like to dye up a fair bit at a time when I've got a project on, and it was nice to be able to open the ribbon box and find it's sitting waiting. I think the colour will be quite good for this. Just making a shank, doing some little buttonhole sort of stitches on the behind the buttons, between the button and the cover, to make a shank so that it sits up proud from the surface of the journal to wrap around the seam binding. Now you can see I'm about to start with the perforating the spine so I can sew in the signatures. An additional advantage of using a cereal box or some other sort of box that you've saved from the recycling is that when you're doing the spine perforating, ready to sew in the signatures, if you've got two of the boxes, you can just use the spine from the second box to create a usable, what am I trying to say here? A pro forma, so that you can actually reuse it over and over again. You can just go in and punch out the marked holes on your journal and on the journal cover, and it's all good. You use it over and over again. And if you've got less signatures in the next one, I've got 5 for this journal, but if you've got less, then you can even just perforate between the lines between the holes that you've already got. I use our old phone book for perforating into, both for these and the binding and the signatures. We rarely use it for looking for telephone numbers these days. You get straight onto White Pages or whatever you have locally to look up your numbers. You don't really need to ever look at the phone book. It always surprises me when I say to someone, "Oh, I haven't got your number," and they say, "Oh, we're in the book." I think, oh, old technology. Well, that's about it. Look out for section 3 coming soon. That's about the signatures. Bye now.